let's dive right in, Scott. We've got a lot to cover, even though it's kind of a slower period in the NFL calendar. The Bengals have been doing some stuff, both in terms of player acquisitions, news with former players, all kinds of stuff going on. But before we get to that, let's start with what we've been doing, and we're kind of getting close to coming to a close, I think, on this. The state of the running backs with the Cincinnati Bengals. Last year, there was some good, some bad. There's, they obviously have talent there, but the question is how much talent and who's going to do what in 2017. And then obviously there's some high-profile names in the draft to look at. So let's start when we talk about the running backs, what you saw out of the crew last year, be it Jeremy Hill, Giovanni Bernard, who went down in that terrible, I think it was week 11 against the Bills. A.J. Green went out for the rest of the season. Giovanni Bernard was out for the rest of the season after that game. Jeremy Hill, a lot of people weren't pleased with some of the things he did, but he didn't fumble the ball away, which is a big thing of his last year. The year prior. And he did, get in the end zone quite often. And then we saw Rex Burkhead towards the end of the year have some good games as well. What did you see last year that you liked, that you didn't like, and what's ahead maybe for the players currently on the roster?
Well, you mentioned this is one of the last ones we're going to be doing, so probably going to be one of the shortest ones too, because we don't really have very many running backs on the roster, which is kind of weird for the Bengals. But you look at last year, what went right and wrong. Jeremy Hill, there was so much hype for him after his rookie year that I think was from week 8 through week 16, led the NFL in rushing, had this insane run of games. Since then, it's just been kind of a disaster. 2.5. So he's been in the league 3 years. 2.5 of those 3 years been very underimpressive. Seems to lack vision. Explosiveness isn't really there. He did have the fumble issues, as you mentioned, not so much last year, but for the career, still has a pile of them over that span. For those 2.5 years, his yards per carry is under 3.7, which is very, unimpressive. And he only has 2 games in that whole stretch. There's I forget what it was, 43, 40 some games in that stretch of 2.5 years. And only 2 of them were 100-yard games, and both of them were against the Browns, which isn't really saying a whole lot. So I think there's a lot to be disappointed by with him. He does get the touchdowns, but that's because when they get the 1-yard line, they just give it to him, and eventually he gets in. Giovanni Bernard, you'd like to think there's better things with him. He's a great receiver. He's a good pass blocker, kind of the consummate third down back. The way he's built, the way he runs, the way he can run from the backfield. They use him a lot on those draw plays and those screens. The way he can catch the ball, he can make difficult catches. Not like A.J. Green, but still, for a running back, make sure good catches.
Right.
He can pick up pass rushers. He makes the elusive plays, which is there's some of those big highlight runs like the Miami Dolphins game where he does some of these crazy things. But despite that, he doesn't really have a high yards per carry, which is kind of surprising. And I think some of it is the yards after contact. He's not much of the downhill runner. One of those guys that, if you get him in space and get him started, he can do some cool things, but he doesn't often create without having a little bit of help. And then, of course, you have the issue he's coming off the major injury this year. So you don't really know what you're going to have this year. There's no guarantees he'll be ready for training camp if he's out. In theory, 12 months, that would bring him back, halfway through the season, and then you hope he's 100%. And we kind of saw with Geno Atkins what happened when he got hurt with a similar injury. He was out for a while. He did come back in that first year. He just wasn't the same guy. So you look at the 2 guys you have on the roster. You have a very unimpressive Jeremy Hill, a better but injured Giovanni Bernard, and then the only other guy they have under contract right now is Trey Carson, who they've never given an NFL snap. So that's pretty much it. And then, of course, you look at the guys who they had last year. Cedric Pierman, the 30-year-old special teamer, he's a good special teams guy. I think a lot of fans would be happy if he came back in that role. Although I'm still surprised they activated him over William Jackson III, since William Jackson was your first-round pick, and he's
right.
The future of your team. Pierman being a free agent, it made no sense. You're bringing back a 30-year-old guy. Granted, you obviously want better special teams play, but when you're out of the playoffs, why not play for the future? And then there was the one bright spot you mentioned, Rex Burkhead. I think fans were kind of mixed on him because we hadn't really seen much of him. I know people who followed him in Nebraska were kind of high on him, but he seemed to be one of these guys. Okay, he's a very good feel-good story. He has some very good, off-field traits, but we really hadn't seen much. And we finally saw him, and by far he had to be the most explosive running back we had last year. And not just in terms of the numbers and yards per carry, but just the things he did, the way he created plays, the way he made, yards when there were no yards there. I think he was very exciting to watch. He was the guy you watch and you're like, wow, yeah, this is pretty awesome. I mean, it was a breath of fresh air to see what he could do, because one of the complaints we often say is, okay, Hill has a bad yards per carry and Giovanni Bernard sometimes has some slow starts, but look who they're running behind. They're going behind a Boyhe. They're going behind Bodine. They don't have a chance. Well, you put Burkhead behind the exact same line, and he just looked so much better. He looked like a much more dynamic runner. He seemed to have a drive, and I think it was one of those things where it was very exciting to see. You'd love to see him go out there and do that, kind of vindicate, hey, he's been sitting forever. He has this great opportunity, and he does that. But of course, he does it right before a contract year, or right before his contract comes up. So the Bengals kind of put themselves in it's a good position to be in for Burkhead, obviously, but by him coming out and having a great year or great run of games right before his contract expires means he's probably not someone you can bring back for a cheap backup role. He's probably going to be looking for starter money somewhere, or at least a split role. If he's not going to be signed as a guaranteed starter, probably something similar to what Toby Gerhart had when he left the Vikings and went down to Jacksonville. A guy where they said, okay, we're going to make you the starter or the preliminary back in a committee, and we're going to pay you accordingly. And I assume Burkhead will get something similar like that. And if that's the case, I don't think the Bengals are going to pay him, since they just paid Giovanni Bernard.
I love everything you said. Like I said, we're going to talk about what may be ahead this season for the Bengals running back group. I just kind of want to give my thoughts on what you were saying, as well as just kind of what's going on with the running back group as a whole. In terms of Pearman, I really like the guy. I think the team loves him, especially as a Charlie Hustle guy, a guy who will do all the dirty work on special teams and things like that. He obviously is well respected in the locker room. I think he's kind of a player chaplain from what I've read and understood, and a lot of players look up to him, not only for that respect, but just his character and being a solid football player that maybe isn't the most talented player on the roster, but does whatever the coaches want, and really embodies a team player, which the Bengals, especially in the early Marvin Lewis era, didn't really have too many of those. They had a lot of me first guys, and so I think Pearman is valuable not only on the field but in the locker room as well. He is coming off a pretty significant injury. I think he broke his forearm or something like that in the preseason, and obviously missed a significant amount of time. Is he replaceable on the field? Yeah. I mean, I think you could get a guy that's still a pretty good special teams player, or you may have a defensive back or something like that that could be a good special teams player. But I think most fans wouldn't be unhappy if Pearman returned to the Bengals, especially because he would be pretty affordable as well. It's really those three other guys that present a major problem and a major amount of discussion probably within that front office this year. Jeremy Hill, it was his second best season of his 3-year career. Still not an outstanding one. You mentioned, there were times where he still was kind of running into tackles, wasn't breaking enough tackles. Again, I mentioned the fumble issues were remedied, but there were more explosive plays this year than last year, but nowhere near what he was in his rookie year. So I don't know. I don't know what that is. I don't know what really is attributing to that. I don't know if he's in his own head. I don't know if he just was kind of a bright-eyed rookie that felt like he didn't have much to lose, and the scheme worked for him as a rookie and just hasn't worked the same way since. I don't know if it's a combination of issues. There's a lot going on there. I've stuck up for him this offseason based on some improvements, but then you look at his stats, and really his only big games, he did pretty well against Denver, but his two other big games were against Cleveland, and Cleveland was awful this year. So And that's, a big chunk of his stats were really in those 2 Cleveland games and then obviously that Denver game. But, you would kind of expect a second-round pick, a guy that was nearly Rookie of the Year in 2014. You'd kind of expect multiple 100-yard games a season out of this guy. We're talking 4 or 5. He is good at the goal line. He gets into the end zone, which is obviously a valuable trait. But I think the Thunder and Lightning approach, for whatever reason, with Hill and Bernard just hasn't really clicked since they've been together. I mean, Hill had his most success when Bernard was injured towards the tail end of 2014. Didn't really pick it up in the same way this year when Bernard went down. And then that's the other issue you mentioned, how obviously today's medicine, today's scientific advances, athletes can recover from these type of devastating knee injuries and things like that much quicker than they used to. I mean, a lot of times these were injuries that were career ending, and now it's, hey, a year later you're back on the field and you're playing pretty well. You can't really bank on that, though. You mentioned Atkins. That's got to be something in the back of their minds when it comes to Bernard and his comeback trail. I agree with you on the, he may resemble more of a third down back, especially what we've seen from him in his time as a Bengal. But I kind of place him in the middle of that every down back and third down back. I think he's a bit more versatile than a lot of other just third down backs in the league. But at the same time, I don't think that you can give the guy necessarily 25, 30 carries many times in a season, as well as throw him the ball, whether it's injury history or scheme or whatever. I almost wonder if any guy on this roster is a true work bell cow back, and maybe they don't need that. But this team, when they've gone to the playoffs many times, whether it was Rudy Johnson, Cedric Benson, whoever, they had a guy, and they fared well as running backs in this system. And these guys are doing pretty good things, but no one's really the shining star of the group. Burkhead, to me, it was impressive what he did against the Ravens, especially since they had such a highly ranked rush defense in 2016. But, they were out of the playoff picture. They might have mailed it in. Is that just kind of a flash in the pan game for Rex Burkhead? It's a big gamble if the Bengals are saying, hey, you're going to be a high-profile back for us this offseason, and they may pass on some other high-profile guys, whether it's free agency in the draft. Now, that segues into 2017. Scott, you had put up a post on Cincy Jungle, which we are live at currently, as well as on our YouTube channel, about Leonard Fournette in particular being possibly a Jeremy Hill clone, and not just because of the LSU thing, but maybe size, other issues. And I want you to talk about that. But obviously at number 9, if some of the guys they like are off the board, whether it's a run on defensive linemen, if Reuben Foster's maybe gone, if Mike Williams or Corey Davis are gone for some reason, and they're staring at either Dalvin Cook or Leonard Fournette, they think that one of those guys could be a franchise-changing player. They may, really think hard about that at number 9. Well, your thoughts on those two guys, as well as kind of talk about your post that you put up on Cincy Jungle examining Fournette.
Yeah, and I think, like as you said, the whole thing with them going, I don't think they would go into the draft maybe targeting Fournette as much as, some of the guys they're looking at, right, be it Solomon Thomas or Corey Davis, Mike Williams, or Burrito Charlton or whoever. Sorry, Taco Charlton. Whoever it would be.
I love it. That's his new name.
If one of those guys is, let's say they're targeting a few of them and they're all gone, and they tend to be a team that generally goes best player available. I think we saw that when they drafted Eifert. They didn't really have a spot from his first year. They did that with Drake Kirkpatrick and sat him for 3 years because they had Adam Jones and Terrence Newman and additional Leon Hall. So I think if they really felt, that Fournette or, even Cook from Florida State was a best player available, I think they could pursue him. And based on what a lot of the draft nicks are, kind of saying, Fournette seems to be someone that they're rating in that top 5, top 10. So it just kind of so that kind of led the post of, okay, is he really a top 5, top 10 guy? There are some similarities between him and Jeremy Hill. So the post is basically, hey, here's some of the similarities, guy. Here are some of the similarities these guys have. Hey, readers, commenters, whatever. What do you think? Do you think they're truly unique? Is one kind of is Fournette just another Hill? And some of the similarities, that both had a very good first year where they led their team in rushing. They both had a great second and third year. As far as overall production, yards per carry, touchdowns, etc. The one difference is Hill was only there 2 years. Fournette was there 3 years. Hill was a redshirt freshman, so he left after his third year, which was a redshirt sophomore year. So he only actually played 2 years. Fournette was there all 3 years. They both are very big runners, are like 6'1", 230. Both play with a very powerful style, both downhill. And they also had very big holes. They had very good offensive lines in front of them. And you watch a lot of the highlights, and they do some good stuff, but a lot of their highlights are, they're not touched until they get a full set of steam and they're 5 yards into the secondary. And then they get hit. Well, by then, it's a very different situation than getting hit, at the line of scrimmage or in the backfield. So and kind of point out, okay, well, here's some of the differences. The differences are Fournette seems to be faster. He obviously hasn't run the 40 yet at the combine, but he seems to be faster. He seems to be better at getting to that speed. One the knocks on Hill in the draft evaluation was there seemed to be some issues with balance and vision, and we kind of see that, as you mentioned, him running maybe not in the right areas, running into people, not always taking the right lane. But is that enough of a difference to really differentiate the two that say, yes, Fournette is truly Adrian Peterson and not Jeremy Hill, or is he somewhere in between? And I think one thing that a lot of draft followers may not have followed that closely is the SEC tends to produce a lot of highly rated running backs that come out as far as the draft and get drafted in the first, second round, but then go on to have very mediocre NFL careers. So I'll do this quickly. I'm just going to read off the list of running backs drafted from the SEC in the last few years who went in the first round. Felix Jones, obviously never did anything. Darren McFadden, tons of speed, never really did anything. Noshawn Marino, really amounted to anything.
Yeah, boy. Yep.
Mark Ingram, decent when healthy, but has never really turned into much. Trent Richardson, obviously a bust. And the last one, Todd Gurley, who jury's still out on him, had a great first year, looked very mediocre his second year. You go to the second round, it's not really a whole lot better. Kenny Irons, who obviously got hurt. Montario Hardesty, never done much. Ben Tate, Christine Michael, Eddie Lacy had a decent first year. Jeremy Hill, TJ Yeldon, and Derrick Henry, who was a rookie. And then you go to the third round, you have Jacob Hester, who is more of a fullback. Glenn Coffey, Stephen Ridley, Al Davis, Trey Mason, Matt Jones, and Kenyon Drake. So over the last decade, those have been the highest regarded, highest drafted running backs for the SEC. Not really instilling a lot of confidence in me that, based on track record, that Fournette would be any different. I mean, obviously every player is unique. All it takes is one good one to bust that trend. But based on the historical precedents, I'm not quite convinced that Fournette is truly a game-changing, the next Adrian Peterson. I'm sure he'd be a fine running back. He'd be better than Hill. Me personally, I'm not a believer in him at number 9.
Yeah, and a lot of people like Dalvin. A lot of draft nicks like Dalvin Cook even more than Fournette. And I think some of that is a little bit more of the versatility thing. Cook is a bit better of a receiver, I think, in most eyes than Fournette. And so that's something to consider there. In terms of Fournette, a lot of time, the SEC is known as a very, very competitive conference in college, and obviously a lot of talented players come there, but it does seem to be more of a product of coaching, recruitment, overall team talent. You look at Fournette in his 3 years at Louisiana State against who I would venture to guess was probably his against the better defenses in the conference. In 2014, he had 10 carries for 42 yards against Auburn. And then he had 21 carries for 79 yards against Alabama that year. And then the following years in 2015 and 2016, he had 31 rushing yards against Alabama and 35 rushing yards this past year against Alabama. So usually when you take a running back like that, especially at the college ranks, you need to see them dominate the best competition that they face. Not the, you're looking at Louisiana Monroe, Sam Houston State, and those are obviously some big games that Fournette had in his time there, but you need to see him do well against those SEC powerhouses, and sometimes he didn't do that, and that worries me a little bit about him. The thing that I wonder, and I liked Ezekiel Elliott coming out last year. I didn't love him. I thought he was a talented guy. Obviously, everybody's going to look at him as these two guys, Cook and Fournette, are talked about as first-round prospects. They're going to look at Elliott and say, okay, can we get a guy like that can really change our team? But you look at the offensive line, and you mentioned this, Scott. I mean, you look at the offensive line, and there's just not, there's not really much of a comparison, especially with impending free agents the Bengals have on their offensive line compared to the Dallas line. So that's got to be worrisome, and I think a lot of people would rather see them shore up the offensive line first than take a high-profile running back. Are you in that camp?
Yeah, I'm definitely much more of a believer that you build up front, offensively and defensively, and then everything else kind of follows. I mean, you look at the Dallas offensive line. You replace Bodine with Zach Martin. You replace Boyhe with Tyron Smith, and Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard probably get a little better. And I think the same thing too. You put Ezekiel Elliott on the Bengals. He's probably not doing a whole lot more than Hill and Bernard did this year, and a lot of it tends to go to what you have. You have that good of a line. I don't think Dak Prescott has that great of a season if he doesn't have that line giving him all sorts of protection, all sorts of time to find an open receiver. And you look even last year when Dallas, the running back situation when they got hurt. They plugged in Darren McFadden, who'd been left for dead, probably had his best season since his rookie year, running behind that offensive line.
Yep.
And before him, you had DeMarco Murray, who had a big year. They just seem to be, you have a good enough line. In the NFL, there's enough talented running backs. So, we saw that with Burkhead, we just talked about. Here's a guy drafted late, kind of sat on the bench for a few years. You put him in, you put him behind a good line, and I think he would look like the game he did against Baltimore, he'd probably look like that on an everyday basis. Because if you give, enough talented people that much time, they're going to get better. They're going to look better. And so I think it's definitely one of those things that, you put Fournette behind the Bengals line, and I know some people argue, well, talent is talent, and that's true. But talent's only going to get you so far if you're getting hit in the backfield. And the thing you mentioned about him against Alabama is one of the things where I think I disagree with the draft experts on Fournette is that when you watch his videos, a lot of his big impressive runs are these plays, where they're pulling the center and they're taking out the linebackers and he's running 5-10 yards before contact. And, he has these powerful stiff arms where he can take out the defensive backs. But whenever he's met in the backfield, you don't see him eluding defenders. You don't see him creating. It's often the line is giving you this, and then he goes with it. It's not, okay, you're surrounded, make something happen.
Right.
And there's definitely instances where that happens, but it's not consistent enough to make you think, wow, this guy is a, number 9 overall player in all of college football this year, as far as guys to draft.
Yeah. And one of the things, and maybe I'm just kind of getting out there in terms of my opinion, but one of the things I think the Bengals need to look at in terms of a running back is one who has played in some bad weather, whether it's rain or snow or whatever. This team plays all of their games obviously in Cincinnati, and as the year goes on, that's not, the weather doesn't get very friendly there. They play in Pittsburgh once a year. They play in Baltimore once a year. They play in Cleveland once a year. So, and I think that's one of the wise things that goes overlooked when it comes to Le'Veon Bell and the Steelers. Bell was a guy that played at Michigan State in some rough weather, and although he's kind of transformed his running style a little bit from college to pro, I think that that's one thing that the Steelers did some good homework on, at least in my opinion, with getting a guy who has played in some poor weather and really knows how to do that, knows how to hang on to the ball in those kind of elements. And I think that that's something that's pretty valuable. Scott, we've got a couple of comments on this topic in our YouTube chat. There's Dylan Hart said, why not trade A.J. McCarron to get extra high picks and fix both problems, meaning offensive line and running back? That's a possibility. We're going to talk about A.J. McCarron a little later in the show. Trade Waldo, a regular on this program that joins us, says trade up back to that back end of the first to get Christian McCaffrey and mix him up with Bernard. That's an interesting thought. And Ryan Jones earlier kind of said, in terms when we were talking about the 2016 group, he said, I miss the Bernard and BenJarvus Green-Ellis combo, which is kind of interesting because I think a lot of people were a little fed up with BenJarvus Green-Ellis towards the end of his Bengals tenure because the lack of big plays there, and he was kind of a 3 yards and cloud of dust guy. Any thoughts on any of those comments?
Well, I think the one thing that I'd like to see the Bengals do, and this might be more play calling than anything, and I think this might go towards some of the things mentioned in the questions, is I'd like to see them, whoever they get as running back, have someone that can play all 3 downs. Not that they have to, but that they can. And you kind of alluded to this with Gio. I think he could if they would let him, maybe not carry it 25 times, but be in on different downs. And that's one of the things that makes him so predictable, is that first down, second down, Jeremy Hill's out there, they're going to run. Third down, they put Giovanni Bernard out there, it's going to be either a draw or a screen pass or a pass. And there's no mixing it up. How often do you ever see Jeremy Hill out there on like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 7? Do you ever see Giovanni Bernard out there on 2nd and 1? And the odds, 99% of the time you don't, because they run very particular plays, very particular formations. So whoever they get, I would hate to see them, move on from Hill and then grab another plotter who is going to be a guy they use in that same situation. Where I think someone like McCaffrey, for example, or someone like Cook can do what Bernard can do, where they could play all 3 downs. And if you had someone like that, you could mix them in and out, and you're not telegraphing to the defense what kind of play you're running based on the formation. So I think that'd be one of the key things for me. Yeah, and that's, and we joked about Tecmo Super Bowl as we opened the show, and maybe this is a little bit going back to Madden football or whatever, but I would like to see the Bengals have 2 running back formations where guys are in there at the same time and mix it up. Some of that is a little outdated, but, and granted this is, almost 30 years ago now, but when they made their Super Bowl run and they were doing a lot of different things, you would see James Brooks and Nicky Woods in the backfield at the same time, and it was very effective. So I think in terms of, I agree with your predictability type of opinion there, Scott, that I think the Bengals need to maybe get these guys on the field at the same time and say, are they going to give it to Hill or Fournette or Cook or whoever, or are they going to do a dump off to Bernard and really kind of keep a defense honest? That's definitely one of the most frustrating things. Is if the casual fan watching the game knows where the play is going, you have to figure the guy who's getting paid, $500,000 to coach the team or coach the opposition knows where the ball is going. Right. Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that is one of the problems that has plagued the running back position over the past couple of seasons since Hill's big year is a little bit of predictable play calling in terms of runs and all of that. So that's our assessment. I think, we gave our opinions and we gave some scenarios. I don't know if we truly have full answers coming up in 2017, but I think the Bengals, whether it's offensive line or adding talent, re-signing guys, they need to do some retooling there in the running game to make that a little bit more of a not that he truly needs it, but a little bit more of a crutch that Andy Dalton can lean on from time to time and a little bit more of a reliable facet to their offense, especially if, God forbid, A.J. Green gets hurt again or something like that. So what do you think, listeners? You can get in touch with us and or catch all of our content in a number of different ways. We're on, as I mentioned a couple times now, we're on Cincy Jungle Live, as well as all of our content is posted there. We have a YouTube channel that we stream live, and you can join us on that.
You can also subscribe to that YouTube channel, and I hope you do leave some comments, not only in the live chat, but also on the content we post there. We're also on SoundCloud for the audio snippets of the show, so subscribe there and check out all of the stuff we have there. You can also get in touch with us via Twitter at BengalsOBI, email theobinsider@gmail.com, and if you can't catch the show live and you're more of an Apple guy or what have you, you can catch us on iTunes. We are listed there. You can download the show there. We would love feedback. We appreciate the support you've shown to us, and through these, this is the 29th episode already, so through these 29 episodes, you guys have been great, and we love that we can interact with you live on the show.